Here we go. Petroleum and electricity prices are set to witness an increase if Parliament gives a green light to new taxation formula, which says a boost to the finances by the Energy Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA. The document generated by the Energy Ministry will effect changes on the regulatory levy on petroleum currently charged at up to 1% of the combination of the landing, transport and storage costs as fuels instead of the current fixed charge. Now, the proposal also looks to introduce a new levy of up to 1% on the consumption charge for electricity. Now, the proposals that have been already endorsed by the Energy Committee on the National Assembly will see to a change into how EPRA currently calculates the two levies in shillings per litre of fuel and shillings per kilowatt hour for electricity. The petroleum regulatory levy is presently set at 0.25. That's 25 cents for every litre of petrol, diesel and kerosene, and 30 cents per kilowatt hour based on EPRA's latest pricing for this month. Fine. Now, they're recommending a new levy of up to 1% from the two levies in shillings per the litre for fuel and shillings per kilowatt hour for electricity and consumption charge for electricity under the proposals already endorsed by the Energy Committee of the National Assembly. Let's look at that. What's your take on this levy plan? And this morning, to help us understand some of these issues that we are talking about on Economic Review, we are joined by Reginald Kazitsu and Alex Degwa. Fine. Reginald, I want to start with you. I'm going to look at what average retail price of selected petroleum prices have been all the way from 2018 to 2020. If you look at that, then you will actually say that we've been on an incremental phase. Just in 2020, when the international prices, even in fuel prices, went lower because of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. But it looks as if in Kenya, prices have always been adjusted upwards, which therefore begs me to ask the question, Reginald, are we trying to give EPRA money? Is that it?
It's a multiplicity of things, Simba, that we have to look at.
Yes.
Number one, the government has to generate revenue, which unfortunately taxes is the only way they know how to generate revenue because of the debt situation that we're currently in. And we talked about it quite a long time ago, that the more debt that as more as debt increase, future revenue, inflation adjustment of excess duty, now they're making so if you look at it going forward, and this is not going to be the last one that we're going to have. They're going to keep on finding ways of increasing taxation without coming out and saying that we've increased taxation. So it is not a way of giving Kipra money, it's a way of giving government money. Because once you run Kipra, there is some money that still goes back to the government. If Kipra can become independent, IPRA, in terms of running their operations without having to get so much money from the government, then it saves also the exchequer. So it is a way of government funding institutions, which in any case, personally, I don't think IPRA needs to be there in the first place. It's a useless institution that is there. There are better ways of regulating oil prices or fuel prices in a country than institutionalizing the way you do it. So petrol prices will continue going up, not because we need to fund IPRA, but we need revenues. World Bank and IMF for years have been trying to push Kenya to charge more on their fuel. And I guess they're coming up with innovative ways of increasing fuel prices in small dosages. Because if you look at the increase, it will be like 0.12, 0.34, something that doesn't hit you that much. But in the long term, if you look at it at a 12-month period, you realize that you've actually paid quite a lot from this increase in the levies.
Pretty much. Just before I let you move, Reginald, this announcement is coming on top of another announcement. Now, just the other day, we did get it from the PS Energy that, look, there is also another levy that's going to be introduced, and that proposal is seemingly going to go through. The diesel levy, which is sort of going to act like a hedge fund should international price of fuel go up to probably $54 a barrel. When you look at that, is it just a proper way of proper taxation in the potent areas where the government now thinks they can get some money?
The major issue that comes also with these two proposals that they've done, when they go percentage based, what you've done is you've created uncertainty.
Yes.
You know, the fifth charge was better, but it's 0.25 shillings for every liter or for a kilowatt. Now, when you go through a stage where you make it a percentage based, and it's not even a fixed percentage, they said up to 1%.
Yes.
So it can be 0.1%, it can be 0.5%, 0.6. How do you run business when you're not sure what your cost is going to be? If lending costs go up, the money they make also go up. If storage costs go up, the money they make also go up, but it's a percentage of these figures. So it brings so much uncertainty into a major cost for most, or something that touches most part of the industry. It touches manufacturing, it touches transport, it touches retail, it touches households, it touches nearly every aspect of the economy, and you just brought uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, then people cannot plan well. And when people cannot plan well, you realize that investment will also start reducing because of the uncertainty that has been created. And as I said, you're going to see more of these things coming into play because revenue has not performed well in previous years, and this year it has been hit very hard. And they now need to start looking at low-hanging fruits. Where can we get consistent revenue on their side? They know people are going to continue using fuel. So that becomes a low-hanging fruit. If you put anything there, you're guaranteed a certain amount. You can actually calculate and say, this amount of fuel we consume in a year, so this amount of revenue we're going to generate from here. So you'll find those things like fuel, things like excess duty, things like VAT, there's going to be a lot of commotion and noise around those things as the government tries to plug in their revenue deficit.
Pretty much. Let me just bring in Alex this morning. Alex, yes, do you think that probably announcements like this at a time when everybody's saying, well, you need to caution the economy from the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, or the economy is not really fully much healed from the effects of the pandemic, should wait? Because it looks, well, that we gotta get the money, whether we like it or not.
I think Reginald has really put it well in terms of the government finding it very opportunistic to raise revenue through the EPRA. But I think from a pandemic view, it's also very opportunistic because remember, this levy is on the landing, storage, and transportation costs. And those are one of the cost elements that have really gone up during COVID-19 because as the demand goes down, that means more fuel has to be stored. So storage costs really go up. Transport, because of less supply being on the roads and in the pipelines, etc., has also increased the prices for those costs. So then that means knowing that COVID is here to stay, knowing that the supply chain is going to be disrupted for a while, then the government sees that as an opportunity to be able to raise more revenue from the players, from the players in commerce. And I think that's extremely opportunistic, but also we are dealing with a government that is really trying to squeeze every single thing in order for them to raise revenue for expenses that were planned and for some expenses that were never planned. For example, the referendum about to cost about, I think, 14 billion.
All right, Alex, when I ask you a question, is it justifiable for them to do that now? Because it looks as if, well, even if we're saying, well, it's opportunistic, it's not the right time to do that. But if you look at even our collections, even after 3 months into the new financial year, it's been miss upon miss, miss upon miss. Do you think that now, from what you said in this morning, that you will say, I think they have no option. They gotta do that if that's where the money is going to come from.
Interestingly, Simba, I think it's only in 2012 where we actually hit the target that that the Treasury had put. I think since 2012 we've never actually hit the revenue target that we set. But I think also for these new levies, I think we need to separate from the fuel ones, from the petroleum ones, and I think for the electricity ones. For the fuel ones are probably opportunistic in terms of revenue, but for electricity, I think the same way that they've been charging us for theft and consumption and corruption at KPLC, I think it's also another way of them trying to find a backdoor to show up the finances of KPLC. But from a revenue point, they are going to squeeze as much as possible. Is that the correct way to go? I think the correct way is really to continue with the fiscal consolidation exercise. We still need to really rationalize our recurrent expenditure. And at the same time, we really need to be able to start rethinking some of the infrastructure projects that we are almost entirely funding using debt.
Pretty much. Reginald, now if you may just cut for us this conversation now for, well, the cost of doing business in the country has been one of those that have been known to be quite high. And now coming at a time now when any investor now looking to come into the country would look at these headlines, do you think we are sending them off? Is it counter interactive to what the government is preaching, that we want to bring in more into the country?
Truth be said, Simba, we've never been competitive when it comes to energy cost or even electricity cost.
Yes.
Even without all these other levies they are putting,
yes.
Kenya is one of the most expensive when it comes to cost per kilowatt. In the country, we are more expensive than Uganda, we are more expensive than Tanzania, we are more expensive than we are more expensive than Ethiopia, and we are way more expensive than Nigeria and South Africa. So if one of the pillars is manufacturing, and the major cost for manufacturing, apart from raw materials, is electricity. And if you are telling me to come and set up a factory in Kenya, and my cost of electricity is going to consume 30% of my production cost, my fixed cost, then you're not going to be even more competitive than that. So we are backtracking on what we are doing. Number two, one thing that makes a destination also competitive is certainty and transparency when it comes to taxation. Unfortunately for Kenya, we do not also score well there, because every budget cycle, it seems like we're always overhauling tax measures, and it's up to CS for finance to decide what is going to tax, what is not going to tax. So as long as we have these activities when it comes to taxation, and clearly we have failed to rein in on our electricity costs, even these free trade agreements we're trying to do with the USA start looking like a bit foolish, because a guy in the US who says, okay, let me go set up a factory in Kenya, thinks it does not make sense that factory in Ethiopia and still have access to Kenya. Yeah, I can set up in Uganda because of the East Africa protocol. I can still supply my things to Uganda, to Kenya, by manufacturing cheaper in Tanzania or in Uganda. So sometimes the policy decisions that we make as a country leave one baffled. That do we actually look at it through, or are we looking at short-term measures? We need money now, where can we get it? And we don't think of the ripple effects of some of the policy measures that are going to be put in place. Because there's something that is called dead weight. So if you change a tax measure, it may be beneficial to that area, but you've created a dead weight in other areas. So you've benefited one area, but you've created catastrophe in other areas. Then you realize that this tax does not make sense. But in Kenya, it seems that that concept is only in textbooks and taught in universities.
Pretty much.
Maybe Simba.
Yes, Alex, if you may, in just a minute, so that we cross on to the next one.
Yeah, maybe if I could just add to what Reginald talked about being competitive from an energy standpoint.
Yes.
I think even besides the levies, if we really look at electricity, I think there are certain deep-rooted things facing KPLC that need to be resolved. Starting from the very fact of the contracts that were entered into between KPLC and power generators.
Yes.
That we used to have these clauses that you call take or pay, in that whether that energy is utilized or not, KPLC either has to pay the energy producers or take that particular power, and that has led us to committing almost up to 1,800 kilowatts power in terms of taking energy. Yet I think we've only been consuming about half of that. I think in the latest figures that were released, in terms of the energy that was supplied to KPLC, which was about, I think, 981 kilowatts per hour, the demand was about 24% less than that. So we have so much excess supply that was definitely due to the political promises of of rural electrification, yet all this technical, the maintenance cost, all that has to be pushed down to the few consumers that are actually consuming the power. So I think in terms of electricity, even besides the levies, there are a lot of deep-rooted issues from the supply elements to maintenance and the very contracts that were entered into between the PLC and the independent power producers.
Pretty much, gentlemen, I want us to move into the last issue that we have for you this morning. So if we get time, we come to the second one, because now it looks as if the plan for Treasury to migrate the country from expensive commercial loans is working out. Now, a report by the Treasury shows that Kenya saw its debt payment fall to 651.5 billion in the year to June 30th, which represented a 23.34% drop from the previous year. Total loan repayments in the review period hit 198.57 billion, lower compared to 850.07 billion in 2018 fiscal year, in what has been Treasury's migration from expensive commercial loans. The repayments for 2019-2020 are also lower than the revised 768.84 billion. Now, the Treasury had earlier projected to spend on, and I quote now, the decline of debt service was on account of decline to lower repayment of commercial debt. That is according to Okur Yatani, CS Treasury. Now, the Treasury said it paid 437.2 billion on interest payments and 214.2 billion in principal payments in the year ended June 30th. Now, 315.5 billion of that repayments catered for interest on domestic loans and 121.8 billion on foreign borrowing. Let me start with you, Reginald. Should we be celebrating this morning?
I think that article was done in a Business Daily, and truth be said, I think that was just poor journalism whoever did that article. Because number one,
yes.
If you look at the cost of debt,
yes.
which is what we are supposed to celebrate about,
yes.
we are paying more in interest than we paid last year.
Yes.
So we cannot therefore say that we are paying less. Interest cost is what should worry you more than principal payment, because principal is principal. The principal is dependent on what you have borrowed and what is due. Interest is contractual. It's dependent on the interest rate, and that is the true cost of a debt. What you pay in principal is not the cost of the debt. You are repaying the money you have borrowed. What you pay in interest is the cost of the debt. So if you are in a period where there are no principal payments which are due, then definitely it will be lower. And to make such an assumption, and we are not even halfway through the financial year, is also a wrong analysis, because the financial year ends in June next year for the government. It's not a calendar year.
Yes,
so
but
if you look at our interest,
is that not the same speak we've been getting from Ukuri Yatani?
No, even you know, when you listen to two gentlemen in this country, you have to listen to them with a very big pinch of salt, the tablespoon of salt. The CS for Treasury and the Central Bank Governor.
Yes.
They are not going to come and tell you we're in trouble.
Yes.
Those are the last two people that are going to come and tell you that statement. Our debt has increased by more than 1 trillion from January up to around the end of September. That's 1 trillion. Most of it, yes, has come from World Bank and IMF. And the worry is that this debt is actually denominated in dollars. So you also need to look at what has happened to the shilling between that period and now.
Yes.
The shilling has dropped by close to 8%, 9%. That's a cost of the debt that they've gotten from most of this 1 trillion from World Bank and IMF has definitely increased by 9% without even them borrowing anything else. All our external debt has increased by 8%, 9% without even borrowing anything else. Your interest expense has increased by 8%, 9% just on the devaluation of the shilling, which we foresee continuing until December, because these guys don't have reserves to support to manage the shilling anymore. So it is misleading and deceiving to tell people that because of moving away from commercial loans, we are paying less. That is not true. Because if you look at the figures, our interest costs are higher.
Yes.
And by the time we are reaching June next year, the amount that we will have paid in this financial year will be around 900 to 990 billion in terms of repayment, which is higher than what we paid last year. So I think one, misleading information from the policymakers, and elevator analysis by the journalist who did that.
Pretty much. Let me bring you in, Alex, and I want to go back and talk about this quote, because that's where Reginald seems to be in total disagreement with even Ukuri Yatani. Now he says, this is what he says: the decline of debt service was on account of a decline to lower repayment of commercial debt. That is quite a direct quote from Ukuri Yatani in this report that he tabled in Parliament, which pretty much shows us all the way to June 30th. Yes, no. Do you share the same sentiment with Reginald?
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, yes. It's really interesting that what Yatani is saying is contrary to what the National Treasury published, I think, last month.
Yes.
When they published the budget outlook paper for this new financial year. At first, early in the year, when the budget policy statement was published in February, I think they had anticipated about, 160 billion in terms of interest payments for the new financial year. But then that has been revised to about 651 billion, and that is going to go to about 680 billion for 2022. And a bit higher to 2023, and then start going low in 2024. So that's almost, that's almost 500% over and above what had been predicted early in the year. And of course, they can attribute that to COVID-19, but we've always known that the amount of debt that we've been taking and how we've been utilizing that debt has always been a problem. Now, I think my biggest, since I think Reginald has talked about the debt element, I think I'm just going to talk about the revenue element.
Yes.
I think I think one of the biggest problems is as the debt continues going really up, revenues are not matching it. And for the last number of years we haven't had the same growth rate in terms of the debt and the debt repayments and the amount of revenue that we are collecting. Again, knowing that there's a second wave that is coming, that Europe is now starting to completely almost go into partial or full lockdown, and knowing that Kenya might, in one way or another, go into a sort of economic slowdown. I always point out that, payee and VAT are the main revenue drivers for the government. So anytime there's a disruption in the supply chain, means that there's less supply in the market, and that means that there's less VAT that is collected. At the same time, if these businesses are not making money, they have to lay out, they have to lay off so many employees, and as salaries go down, as people lose their jobs, then pay goes down. So the moment that pay VAT is affected, then the
Yes.
revenue for government is is significantly affected. If that is affected and the government still has to respond to COVID-19, then there's no way that there's no other way other than to to continue piling up the debt. So I think one of the biggest problems is, number one, we have to have a proper strategy in terms of revenue mobilization. And number two, we really, really need to think about our fiscal consolidation effort, continue refinancing the commercial debt using concessional loans. We need to look at the wage bill. It's very interesting that the wage, Kenya's wage bill is now almost equivalent to the interest repayments that we do. So I think that's a really, really difficult point that we are really looking at a looming public debt crisis if we are not already there.
It's fine. All right, Reginald, and I just want to bring you in on these numbers as well, so that you actually make it clear, because I get from when you said in this morning, for you say, well, we do not need to care about our principal repayments because you gotta pay that. So let's look at the interest that we pay on that. So now let me take you to the numbers that are contained in the report. That's saying the 315.4 billion of that repayments catered for interest on domestic loans and 121.8 billion on foreign borrowing. Is that not an indication that the balance is shifting away from the cheaper commercial loans? These expensive commercial loans?
Definitely, Simba. When we do change the mix and you get more concessional loans than commercial loans,
yes,
they will become cheaper. But we have not, it's not like we've gotten concessional loans that we have used to repay the commercial loans that we used to have.
Yes.
The commercial loans that we used to have are still there. We have added more concessional loans on top of that. That does not mean that what we were paying in commercial loans has reduced. It means that we're actually paying more interest because we have borrowed more, and that money that we borrowed, we did not use to repay debt. We used that money for, quote unquote, COVID, and we know it's a very big quote. But that's where the point comes in. So you are borrowing locally. Yeah, this locally you can say you borrow to repay some, but we've been borrowing even more to increase the domestic debt itself. It is not reduced. So the day you see that our absolute debt figure is reducing, yeah, and it's reducing because the concessional loans are increasing more than loans, and as the commercial loans fall due, and we are not getting more, then we say our interest expense starts reducing. So just to point what Alex said, if I take interest or this to revenue, currently it's around 45, if not around 50 shillings. For every 100 shillings a KRA collect, 50 is going to debt. A year ago, this was around 30 something shillings. 2 years ago, this was around 20 something shillings. So when you look at that matrix, then you realize that we are not improving. So if you look at absolute figures and fancy speeches, then it's very easy to say, we paid less irrespective of what was there in the previous year. But if now 50% of your revenue collected is going towards paying debt, then that becomes a worry, because we are saying that every other thing that we need to spend on needs to be less than 50%. Your development to be less than 50%. And the problem that is where I'm saying that this is not going to work that well is because if you look at the recent statement that came from CS Treasury himself, where the ministries and parastatals missed their target by around 49 billion, how does he plug that gap? He has to borrow more to plug that gap. So I think for Kenya, for us to get out of this debt mess and this currency crisis that we are about to face, is to sit and have a candid conversation on what type of economy do we want to have. Just press the restart button and let's just go back to the beginning. But if you try to fight the symptoms of debt, taxation, currency, and this, will be in a vicious cycle for the next 5-10 years.
Reginald Kazuke and Alex Ndegwa, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It has been quite a conversation.